News Radio 700 WLW.
Do you go out much as far as going to restaurants and
I do.
that kind of thing?
I like going out. I go out and meet my friends at least once a week, unless I'm traveling.
Now, are you a good tipper?
I am an excellent tipper. I used to be a bartender.
There you go.
So, yeah I am an excellent tipper, 25-30%.
I always try to tip well.
Yeah.
But you know what? I'm not necessarily, and I think a lot of people feel this way, enforced tipping.
No, I agree. Like when you're going to get a smoothie and there's a tip jar, that's like, oh, man.
Right.
That's weird. I mean, if you're serving me, that's one thing.
Well, let's talk to an expert in this matter and get a conversation going on here. He is Richard Weylman, I believe it is. Richard, is that correct?
That is exactly right. Good to hear your voice, Ed. Glad to be with you today.
He's in the Keynote Speaker Hall of Fame, Customer Experience Hall of Fame.
Wow.
He's an expert in these matters. He is a best-selling author as well. So, Richard, you heard us talking there. And I think, do you think a lot of people feel like we do? I don't mind tipping if things are, up to snuff. But when you just put it out there, you just handed me a Coke, and I'm supposed to give you, $2 or whatever. I don't think a lot of people feel good about that.
That's exactly right. I mean, there's nothing worse than guilt tipping. It's getting out of control. Some people think it's a substitute for a pay raise, but what it really is oftentimes is blame shifting. I need to raise my prices, but the way I don't want to get blamed for that, we're going to blame the employee because they need a tip to be able to work here. And so it all gets very convoluted. If you really think about how tips started many years ago, it was to ensure proper service. That was the English idea. And then it became tips to ensure prompt service. And then we finally got to ensure positive service, and we all love it. But now, with forced tipping, it's like, you got to tip us if you even want me to hand this Coke across the counter to you. Right. That seems a little out of sync with the American psyche. I think you'd agree.
Yeah, and
completely.
I think that's what the way people feel, and it's in Europe, and I think, Richard, you know this as well. I think, Donna, you do, that tipping is almost an insult. It's kind of like, what are you giving me? What are you giving me extra money for?
That's exactly right. And Donna's idea of ordering a smoothie, and they hand it from the machine to you, and but before they're going to hand it to you, you have to pay, and they're going to ask you for. I mean, today it's 15, 19, 20, even 30%. And there are many devices now that don't even give you the option of no tip. So it's really forced tipping, and you're right. In Europe, I've spent a lot of time in Europe. I was with Rolls-Royce for years, and I've traveled all over Europe and other parts of the world, and tipping is just an unheard of idea. Good service is a minimum expectation, and they provide it to you. In the U.S., though, and I see it now in Canada, this forced tipping idea, and what it really does, it not only drives up the price, but it starts to destroy the experience that people have.
Yes.
And I think we're going to see a pushback. Don't you, Donna?
I hope so, because to be honest, like Eddie asked me early on in this conversation, do I tip? I am a great tipper, was a bartender. I feel like you should tip, but not tipping for, just random things that you're out shopping. It gets so ridiculously expensive. And I know when I don't feel good about tipping like that wasn't worthy of tipping somebody, and it feels weird, and I still do it. So when Eddie brought up guilt tipping, that's exactly how I feel. Exactly. And yeah. I hope that, Richard, that it goes away, because I think everybody else feels this way as well.
Well, you're right. I mean, let's tell the truth. Service in this country is a minimum expectation. So, if you buy something, you expect to get some level of service with it. If I order a smoothie on a kiosk and that individual then hands it out of a machine across the counter and expects me to give a 15 or 20% tip, that's somewhat out of sync of that which it is that I want to accomplish. If you think about why people tip, they tip for 4 reasons: because the server was very caring, or very thoughtful, or very kind, or very empathetic. After that, there's not much on the table. So if you get a rude server, you don't tip as much. If you get somebody that's kind and thoughtful and caring, you want to tip those people. Yesterday, I went to a buffet with a family and had several guests there, and they brought me the check. and it was 19% included in the check. Now, first reaction is, that's fine. I would have 19%. I have no objection. There was no place for an additional tip. But I will tell you, Donna and Eddie, I would have tipped that server more had I had the option to do so, because she did a spectacular job. But I didn't have that option. I just had the 19% they included. That's the downside of forcing people to tip.
Yeah, and Richard Weylman is our guest, and Richard, I think that's a case a lot of times. I think people get resentful.
That's
honestly,
the bummer about it.
If it's like, look, I'll give you a good tip, but when all of a sudden, and you tell me where this changed, where the suggested tip, and you and I are of a certain age, Richard, that I remember when a good tip was like 12, 14%. Now, if you're not tipping 18, 20, 22%, you're a piker.
You're exactly
Yes.
right.
That's a fact.
That's exactly right. And now you go through drive-up windows, and they want you to tip at a drive-up for handing it out the window to you. And so what's happened is, and I think with a turn in the road, as inflation really took off after the pandemic, et cetera, that the cost of doing business is up and the cost of everything is up. So what's happened is now the shift is for the employees to make, let's say, enough money, providing they even get the tip. There's no guarantee they're getting it. We'll say they are. And I think in most cases they do receive the tip. But what's happened is, instead of further increasing prices for the product or service, what they say is, okay, we'll try to stabilize the price, but now we want you to tip our employees so we don't have additional costs there. But it's a false narrative. And I think you're exactly right. People resent it. I talked to two people this morning on clients of mine, and both of them are CEOs, and they resent the fact that they have to give a tip when they go into a Starbucks or they go in to get a smoothie or anything else. And, we all know what happens when you start making mandates that this is mandatory. People just psychologically go full rebellion.
Hey, Richard.
Because you're treating...
Richard, I think one of the things that I find with the tip jar thing, I remember the first time I ever saw a tip jar, I believe it was at Starbucks. And and so, you go in there and let's say your coffee was $1.50, whatever the case might be. And so I just, I toss the 50 cents in there or whatever that was left. I'd give them a couple of bucks and throw the 50 cents in there or some such. But now it's like, if you don't put paper in there, man, people are looking at you funny.
That's exactly right. The expectation has shifted dramatically. And as I said, a good service is a minimum expectation. Today, it's like, if you don't tip them, you can pretty much be fearful that they're going to resent it. Who knows what's going to happen behind that counter? And most importantly, if they're relying on that tip to make rent, that makes it even more difficult, because now you really have guilt. That's the issue that people are dealing with. Things are so expensive today that, to your point earlier, Donna, when you put the tip on top of it, things really get expensive. I worked in a bar as well, and tips were really appreciated, but and that was part of the life, and you had that happen. But today, if I'm mixing a drink for somebody, fine, I expect to get a tip, particularly if I'm doing something that's unusual for them, serving a beer, and everybody for the most part tip. But today, I mean, God, you can order on a kiosk at the front of the store, walk up to the counter, they hand it to you, and then they flip it around for you to pay, and there's a tip. Or you have to pay on the kiosk, give them a tip, and all you've done is ordered your food.
Right.
So people are resentful, and it's going to backfire.
I agree.
And people will stop going. Why do people go out? They want an elevated experience, which builds an emotional engagement. And if there's no elevated experience, there's no emotional engagement, people will rebel against that. We do it all the time.
All right.
We vote with our feet in our checkbook.
Well,
Thank you.
Richard, we need to get you back here again. Like I said, we're having really bad weather issues here, so I'm sorry we're interrupted, but we would love to have you back another time.
Feel welcome to reach out. It's always a joy to speak to you. Take care in Cincinnati and the surrounding area. Everybody stay safe and God bless.
Thank you,
We'll talk to
Richard.
Eddie and Donna.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.